Hey everyone, welcome in for another episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. We are only a week away from WCC Media Day. We are only about a month away from the start of the college basketball season, which is an incredible thing to think about. Practices have started. We're really starting to rev up and get ready to go for the season. So we're going to start to dive into all the team previews beginning next week. And we'll start to rattle off each of the nine team previews and go through the ins and outs, what each of these teams are going to look like going into the year. And also we'll go over a few other things that have kind of popped up. There was a coaching rankings, official D1 college coaching rankings put out by Busting Brackets. So we'll go through that list in a little bit. I want to kind of go over maybe Gonzaga starting five and where this starting five ranks amongst some of the best starting fives that we've seen from Gonzaga over the last decade. And I want to start with one of the bigger pieces of news that came out over the last week or so, and that was that USF and the WCC have announced that the USF Gonzaga game set to be played on February 29th in San Francisco will not be played on the Hilltop. In fact, it will be played at the Chase Center, home of the Golden State Warriors, which is a huge step, I think, for the WCC to play one of its marquee games in a marquee facility. Obviously, we know that there's not too many opportunities for WCC teams to play in full arenas. Even if you actually look around the WCC, there actually now isn't a quote arena. The largest of the remaining buildings is now the Spano Center at Pacific. Even the McCarthy Center is just short of where Pacific is, the capacity that they are able to hold. So this is going to be a really cool, fascinating thing that USF is going to be doing for that game. I think it's exciting, but I do have mixed feelings about the relocation of this game, because I'm definitely guilty of thinking that in a number of different scenarios, would I like it that the WCC tournament in Las Vegas not be at the Orleans and we could move it to the MGM Grand or maybe the T-Mobile Arena? It's like, and be playing a bigger facility and play in that environment. I think that would be amazing. I think that would be really cool. There were times throughout in amongst the Gonzaga St. Mary's rivalry, I thought that it might be a really cool thing to be playing over at Oracle Arena, now just the Oakland Arena, to host that game there in an NBA arena. But the one thing that always kind of like made me hesitate, that made me pause and pull back on that idea, was the fact that, and we see this in Las Vegas every single year, Zag fans take over the building. They do it in Las Vegas. They take over most visiting arenas that they go to. Ask San Diego, ask Pepperdine, ask LMU, ask a lot of the teams around the conference, and they will tell you Zag fans travel well. And I fully expect that to be the case in San Francisco, that they will take over the building, that it will be a majority Gonzaga crowd. And I want to be pleasantly surprised that USF fans, alumni, students, and San Francisco in general shows up and supports the Dons in that game, which will be the final week of the regular season. And I do think USF's going to be playing for something as we get down into that final week. So I think there's going to be value there for USF fans to hopefully get out and go to this building. I just know that this is going to end up being a heavily pro Gonzaga crowd and take away what home court advantage USF might have had otherwise in this game. And so again, I have mixed feelings about this. I think it's going to be really exciting. I'm going to try to make a plan to be at that game and to be able to watch that one, because I think it's going to be a really good game, first off. And then just to see the environment of being able to play in that facility. One thing I do hope is that they will be able to get a USF logo on that floor, and USF has played already a couple of times in that building. They will be playing at least once there this year before the Gonzaga game. They will be playing Minnesota at the Chase Center. So this is a building that the Dons are pretty familiar with, even though we have a largely new cast up on the hilltop. I do think that there's at least going to be some familiarity with this building. Gonzaga as a team does have some familiarity because they did play there a couple years ago in the NCAA tournament. Of course, we have almost an entirely new cast of characters short of Anton Watson. So it will be interesting to kind of see how this game goes, how USF adjusts to playing in probably what it's going to feel like a road environment. Gonzaga, I mean, it feels like they're playing a home game, high energy game anywhere they go, no matter what. So I don't think it's going to impact the Zags as much as it may impact USF. Still, excited to see this move. I think it's a big step in the right direction for the WCC. Maybe we see similar things for other games in the future. Maybe we get Santa Clara USF to do the same thing, or maybe St. Mary's does the same thing. Is there a possibility of either this working out with one of the LA teams, or even in Portland with the Pilots and maybe moving over to the Moda Center? We'll see. Like I don't want to dive too deep into that, or even going up to Gonzaga and being at Spokane Arena. Lots of options. I think there's a lot of excitement behind what this potentially could mean, and maybe we'll hear a bit more at Media Day next week about how this maybe could expand, and that this is just a first glimpse and a trial run of what could be in the future. All right, so next, speaking of Gonzaga, I'm thinking about this starting five, and I think we're pretty well established who the starting five of this team is going to be. We know it's going to be Ryan Nembhard at the point guard. We know it's going to be Nolan Hickman, likely Steele Venters. If Graham Ike is healthy, it's going to be him. And then Anton Watson rounding out that starting five. And on paper, as we know, it's like as I have said and a number of others have said, this is a really good starting five. You know, one of the best point guards in the country, one of the best power forwards coming back if he's fully recovered. You have one of the best defensive players in the country in Anton Watson. You have a lot of potential in both Venters and Nolan Hickman to see what they can do. And I'm just going to take just the starting five. I'm not going to worry about the bench and their depth right now. And I was trying to think about how this starting five lines up with some of the other really great starting fives that Gonzaga has had over the years, and specifically over the last decade, because this is a team that has been to the Sweet 16 for 7 straight years. This is a team that has been to the title game in 2 of those years. This is a team that has incredibly high expectations and has been able to recruit to match those expectations. So I'm going to just kind of dive in and really start to kind of rank these starting fives and where I think this one lands, because there are so many good teams on this list. And so a few parameters for how I'm doing this. So I'm taking the last 10 years. So I'm going all the way back to the 14-15 season. And I am taking the 5 players with the most starts for Gonzaga in each of those years as the starting 5. All right. So with that parameter set in place, where the number 10 on this list, and this is how ridiculously good these Gonzaga teams have been. It's that I'm looking at number 10 being that 14-15 team, and that is a team of Kevin Pangos, Gary Bell, Byron Wesley, Shemek Karnowski, and Kyle Wilcher. And this is an incredibly talented team. Maybe one of my not favorite, because I'm not going to go as far as to say I favorite any Gonzaga fans, but players. But it's like, I think the Pangos Bell backcourt was one of the more efficient and fun backcourts that Gonzaga has had. Like, they complemented each other so well. That was a pairing I really like to see. Wilcher, obviously coming over from Kentucky, we know what he was capable of and what he became so fast for the Zags. Shemek Karnowski, this was young Shemek Karnowski, and we got to see just how dominant, and well, he was still growing into that role, but just he was one of those guys in those years that was, you could see what his potential was going to be, so long as he could stay healthy. The number 9 on this list is the 17-18 team. Like, I was looking at this, and that's the one that stood out. So this is the team right after the title team. This is Josh Perkins, Silas Melson, Zach Norvell, Tilly, and then Jonathan Williams. This was another really fascinating team. Again, it's hard not to like any of these teams. So that's where, like, I was looking at that one. They had a great amount of success, obviously not as good as the 16-17 team because they went to the title game. And again, like, maybe this was a team that was greater to the sum of their parts as opposed to great individual talent, because there's some great individual talent that I can kind of look at. And I'm not going to go through the whole 10. I'm going to kind of skip through and just kind of peek at what some of these others, and I'm going to skip all the way to the top, and then I'll tell you where I kind of have this 23-24 team. Because number 1 is like, and we can nitpick all day, all about who number 1 should be, but the 2021 team that also went to the title game during the pandemic, Jalen Suggs, Joel Ayayi, Corey Kispert, Andrew Nembhard, Drew Timme. You have 4 NBA guys on that starting 5. It's hard to really beat that group, knowing what Jalen Suggs is capable of and what he's hopefully developing into in the NBA. Obviously, injuries have kind of derailed him a bit early on. Andrew Nembhard, we know what he's capable of, and he's going to be really, really good moving forward. We saw what he could do in year 1 in the NBA. Drew Timme, enough said. Corey Kispert is already developing into a really good player. The second starting 5 I had was the 18-19 team. That's a team that also has 3 NBA dudes on it. After Perkins and Zach Norvell, you still have Kispert, then it's Rui Hachimura and Brandon Clark. That was one of the more terrifying front courts the Gonzaga has had with those 3, especially Hachimura and Clark, especially Brandon Clark coming over from San Jose State and really being that complementary player and defensive stopper that team needed. That's another team that just stands out. Number 3 was the 21-22 team. Nembhard, Bolton, Strother, Holmgren, and Timme. Again, like, you have 4 more NBA players in a starting 5. So there's a lot of crossover, obviously, because we're only talking within the last decade. That one sticks out as number 3 just because of how versatile and how different each of those pieces were. And so this one, where am I ranking this one? Like, I feel like as a unit, as a starting 5, this one doesn't quite measure up to last year's, in my opinion. And I think the Drew Timme and Julian Strother components are part of that. And they're slightly ahead of the 15-16 Wilcher Sabonis team. So I do have this 23-24 team as maybe the 6th best of the last decade, which, again, you're lining up against some largely NBA talent-heavy teams. I don't know if there's a ton of NBA talent or future NBA players on this roster as of right now. I think Ryan Nebhard is probably the one that sticks out as maybe the one who's going to make that leap. I think it's going to be a hard road to climb for the others. And so I think there's just a lot of unknowns about how this group is going to mesh. There's a lot of new pieces. One of the things Gonzaga has done a very good job of is having continuity over the years. That, again, like as I started naming off those teams, Drew Timmy's on a lot of them. Andrew Nebhard's on a lot of them. Kyle Wilcher's on a lot of these teams. So Corey Kispert is on a lot of these top teams. So you have to start thinking about the continuity. And right now, this Gonzaga team, outside of Watson, Hickman, who are at this stage going to be more complementary players and maybe your star players, you need some continuity from the stars. And right now, maybe this isn't that team who holds the continuity as not nearly as much as some of these other teams. So do I think that this team has a high ceiling? Absolutely. This team has an incredibly high ceiling. The starting five has a high ceiling. But is it as high as some of the others? I don't think it is. I don't think it looks that way. And when I start the team previews, I'll kind of dive into that a little bit more, go into detail about what I anticipate from this Gonzaga team. You get a little bit of a preview on that if you hop over onto the Locked On Zags podcast. I did guest over there. Thanks, Andy Patton, for having me. So that's something you can check out. We do talk a little bit about St. Mary's Gonzaga and that matchup, and then also what does a little bit more about the Zags and what that's going to look like. But the team preview is also going to be coming up on this pod in the next few weeks. All right. So thinking about what this Gonzaga team is going to look like moving forward, I think this is going to be one of Mark View's tougher coaching challenges over the last decade because of the number of unknowns and because of the bench, because of the number of unproven talents that Gonzaga has, who's going to be sitting on that bench and hopefully providing some level of a positive production for that team. It's going to be a juggling match. And also, I think it's going to largely depend on development, which leads me into talking about the coaches and the coaching ranks that Busting Brackets came out. They ranked all the Division I coaches, and all, so you can kind of get a quick synopsis of the coaches, who, like, where they are now, where they were a year ago. One of the other things also kind of that's interesting in this note is that it takes career. So not necessarily where they are in this stage today, but where they are career-wise, and also it's balancing the two. And so I thought it was actually really interesting to kind of see where everybody in the conference was and see where this conference ranked as far as coaching. And so going into last year, there was a lot of unknowns. So there was an unknown about Leonard Perry because he hadn't been a head coach in a while, so he was ranked a little lower. Chris Gerlufsen, this was, again, like one of his really big opportunities to be head coach at the D1 level. He's had one or two like short-term opportunities. This was going to be the first big opportunity. Stan Johnson was bouncing back, so we really had to kind of see how all these coaches were going to pan out, and what that was going to look like going into this year. So all that said, I'll start going up 9 through 1, and I'll kind of like leave a little bit of a synopsis on each of these. So at 268, kind of no surprise, Leonard Perry is here. He was up from 293 a year ago. We know that Pacific had a good year last year. Remember, they did finish 5th in the conference a year ago. They had a lot of new pieces, that not really jumped off the page. Kalen Boone was maybe the one example of someone who jumped off the screen a bit. But then this was a success by committee. You had 7 players getting at least 13 minutes a game, so there was a lot of players getting time on the court, and so you really got to see a lot of different faces, a lot of different people really start to step in, and Leonard Perry deserves a lot of credit for the success that they had. So it was really kind of nice to see him kind of like jump up in these rankings from where he was. At 218, Chris Gerlefson, he was at 294. Again, talked about like Chris Gerlefson, there wasn't much of a resume, so I wasn't surprised to see him lower last year. Another 20-win season at USF, kind of holding the fort from the last like 6 to 7 years, where USF has been almost an automatic 20 wins. They were 20 wins again last year, so keeping the train on the tracks, and it looks like I think USF is going to be one of those teams who has an outside shot at the NCAA tournament. 210, Stan Johnson. That also went up from 237 a year ago. And Stan Johnson, we know, is one of those coaches that is, I think, on the rise. He's now had 2 winning seasons in 3 years at LMU. This year, I think, is going to be a big, big year for him in that program. An LMU team that has not had back-to-back winning seasons in almost 30 years. So I think that there's a realistic shot that is going to happen. But then also, they are one of the 3 teams I think is going to be in that mix for the 3rd spot, and then also possibly an NCAA tournament bid. 140, Shante Leggins over at Portland. He went down a little bit for 131 because we know they had some very, very positive early season success. They knocked off Villanova. They almost took out North Carolina. And then it all fell apart after that. Injuries plagued them. They had any number of different rotations, guys at the lineup. They really could never get into a rhythm. I think most people think there's a lot of promise here. There's still a lot that can be done with that Portland program under Shante. So it's just a matter of time to see if he could potentially move up here. So then we get to the part of this list where there has to be a recognition of how good the coaching is in the WCC. And I do think that this list actually does kind of show that. All of the last 5 WCC coaches are all in the top 100. And of all the conferences with coaches in the top 100, only the power conference schools have more than the WCC, and then also the A10. The Big 12 with Big 12, SEC, ACC, Big 10, Pac-12, Big East, and then the A10 all have 7 or more, but the WCC has 5 of its 9 in the top 100. And I'd also make note that percentage-wise of the league, that only then the power conference schools, the Power 6, have a higher percentage of top 100 coaches than the WCC. Even the A10 then falls below the West Coast Conference in that matter. Which again, we talked about just like the amount of success that the coaches that are in this league have, the amount of respect that a lot of these coaches have, and then also the potential that some of them do have. Because I mentioned the other 4: Shante Leggins, Stan Johnson, Chris Gerlefson, Leonard Perry. I don't think that there's anyone who would necessarily disagree that all 4 of them are seem like they're only going to get better. That there is a lot of space for him for opportunity to become one of those coaches that's also up there. And the 5 that are in there, there's a lot of skins on the wall as far with this group. 95, Lorenzo Romar. We know what Romar has done in his career, not only at Pepperdine, but then also at St. Louis and then also at Washington. We know it's been shaky the last couple of years, and he did go down in that ranking from 82 to 95. And so we can kind of point to the lack of on-court success that Pepperdine has had, but you can't ignore the talent that has still been on these teams. And recruiting is a huge component of the coaching gig, and Romar knows how to recruit. And you can't really deny that part. 75, Herb Sendek. He was at 92, so this was a big leap. I think a lot of people maybe forgot how successful he has been in almost every stop. This is now his back-to-back third-place finish in the WCC, and that's no small feat. Again, when you're really battling an uphill climb with Gonzaga and St. Mary's sitting 1-2, being the consistent third has not been easy. Even for the likes of BYU, as we even saw while they have the name and they had the on paper talent, even the last couple of years, in their last 2 years in the WCC, they placed in 5th. So it's not like we haven't. That third spot is the one that is almost up for grabs on a consistent basis, and Santa Clara is starting to make the case that it might be them. 72, Steve Lavin. I mean, we know what his resume says. We know the success he's had at UCLA, the success he had at St. John's. Coming to San Diego I'll admit, was a bit of a head scratcher. Last year was not a good year, but nobody really expected it to be a good year. And this offseason really looks like it's a teardown and we're going to start from scratch. And that might be the best thing for that San Diego program, because this is a team that just has not really had an identity in a while and needs to find that identity. And maybe it was just clear the deck and really start fresh and do this from scratch so that Steve Lavin can really make this team kind of emulate his vision and his style a lot more. 33, up from 38, Randy Bennett. And there has been a lot of Randy Bennett love this offseason, where I think that more and more people are starting to come around to the idea. Even more casual college basketball fans are coming around to the fact that he is one of the more underrated, underappreciated coaches in all of college basketball. What he's been able to do at St. Mary's with the limited resources, the small school, the playing in the Gonzaga shadow, the Pac-12 shadow. It has just been an incredible thing to witness over the last 20 plus years of what he's been able to do in Moraga, what he's been able to do at St. Mary's. And year after year to be able to not only be in contention for the NCAA tournament, but over the last few, it's be one of the more dangerous teams in the tournament. I think they've just kind of lucked out on who they've had to face. I mean, back-to-back years, like the teams who've knocked them out, the national champions, and then also UCLA. They've just run into some bad matchups, I thought, but it's hard to kind of actually kind of like put into like words of how much like he has actually done for that program, and then also just how good he has been over the last 20 years. And then, of course, sitting atop, number 4, Mark Few. We can go over all the accolades of Mark Few, but like we know he's one of the top coaches in the entire country. He's going to be a future Hall of Famer. We know all of this. Anyone who is still going to be a hater on that front is just clearly not, just wants to be a hater and doesn't want to acknowledge just how great both of those coaches, be Mark Few and Randy Bennett, have been over the last 20 plus years. again, like looking at this list, going up and down this list, you have 5 top 100 coaches in the WCC, which I think is still kind of an amazing feat. It's hard. And again, once these teams get into WCC play, it is hard. It is tough. And I think it is vastly underappreciated how tough this league is, because everyone always just looks at Gonzaga and St. Mary's. And because you don't see that happen in other conferences. That doesn't happen in other conferences where 2 teams dominate the whole thing. One team dominates the whole thing year after year after year after year. You have teams like maybe like the Vermonts of the America East, but they're the outlier. Gonzaga is the outlier. St. Mary's is the outlier. You don't see this happening in the A10. You don't see this happening in the Missouri Valley. You don't see it happening in the MAC. The champion changes way more often than it does in the WCC, way more often than it does in the America East. And going to wrap it up again. I want to make mention that I will be starting all of the team previews starting next week. We're going to have a few interviews also lopped in there as well, so stay tuned for that. We're going to have the different groups, and I'm going to find my notes on exactly what order I'm doing these in, because I do have it all kind of mapped out. So starting next week, we'll be putting together the previews for USF Santa Clara and Pepperdine. The following week, we'll go ahead and do St. Mary's, LMU, and Pacific, with the last week being Gonzaga, Portland, and San Diego. So we're still waiting on a few different things to finally wrap up the previews. Most of my previews are already kind of noted out, ready to go. I'm excited for that. I'm excited to get this going. Basketball is almost here. We are almost there, almost at the finish line. I'm excited. I know you're all excited. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. Be sure to favorite it on Spotify or wherever you listen to the podcast. Follow me on social media at Post by Zach. All the platforms, you can find me there. And then going to try to be working on a few something a little special for the final week before we get into conference play. I will be working on something, so we'll hopefully have an announcement about that in the coming weeks or so. All right. With that, again, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer. I will catch you later.